What's up, Doc? What's up, Doc?
Hello, everyone. Your host today, Sidney St. James. I've been clicking up a storm on my computer here on my newest novel called Murder in the Prairie Edge Museum, due out in the fall, when suddenly a thought hit me. I don't understand why this occurs, but I was way up in the present day in my hometown murder mystery when I thought of another loving relationship from way back in 1350 BC. That's right, I know. How in the world could a romance mystery novel written in 2022 have anything to do with a romance so far back in biblical times, right? Well, I think of all sorts of romances when writing a book, and the one I wish to talk about today is a real doozy. And you think Judas was an awful betrayest? You've got another thing coming today. In my first episode of Season 3, I mentioned that most of my novels have some sort of input from the Bible. Maybe it's only a prayer, or dream, or thought before pulling a trigger. But there's always something. Oh, and yes, even Satan and Archangel Michael solving a disagreement in my Storm Lord trilogy series. So, when I finish the novel, you'll see something in the Murder in the Prairie Edge Museum, scheduled for release in the fall, that brings out a specific scene from something from the Bible. My story today comes from taking my infamous time machine. That's right, I got it fixed, and now we're ready to go back to the 1300s before the birth of Jesus Christ. I've never gone back so far before, but I think I'm ready for the trip. Here we go. We have stopped. The sun rises on the book of Judges, which can be difficult to understand sometimes, and about how righteousness in a world without rights or wrongs can possibly exist. When we point to wholesome examples of relationships in the Bible to strengthen our relationships or marriages, we obviously don't mean to talk about the so-called love story between a man and woman known as Samson and Delilah. However, until this broadcast, I didn't know that. For those unfamiliar with the story, Samson, a judge God had appointed over Israel, decided to disrupt every cotton-picking rule in the book. Even though his family took a Nazirite vow, he didn't follow the guidelines by any stretch. Instead, he wreaked havoc. He wreaked revenge on the Philistines in often violent ways. But worst of all, he fell heads over heels in love with a woman by the name of Delilah. And although Jewish people throughout all of history married foreign wives, just like Moses, just like Solomon, God often cautioned against marrying or having a relationship with those on the outside of the Israelite community. Many times, such women of men would lead entire families astray, chasing after idols of foreign gods. In her own way, with all the tools of the trade, Delilah leads Samson astray, and he pays the ultimate price. The man that God sent to earth was famous for his strength, but when he allowed Delilah in on the secret of why he was so strong, she robbed him. She robbed him of all of it and turned him over to the Israel enemies. In this short story romance, we'll explore why their relationship goes down in disgrace in the Bible, why their relationship fell entirely apart, and what all of us can do to learn from their example. So now, let's begin our story. And as always, thanks for dropping in today and spending part of your day or night listening to my broadcast. Although we covered a lot of the story above, let's uncover their love story from the beginning to the end. We first meet Delilah in Judges 16 in the Bible, whom Samson fell in love with. We know from previous passages that Samson got in trouble for falling in love with the wrong type of woman. But he seems to ignore all the red flags and dives headfirst into his relationship with her. Before I start my story today, I would like to introduce a few of my guests who are here to help me broadcast. My two grandchildren, Alyssa Nicole and Dylan James, with their sidekick, Gabby Alita, Dylan's +1 to my broadcast today. Alyssa and Dylan are my grandchildren, as I just said, and Gabby, well, she's their BFF and mine too, from way back. Just not as far back as my story we'll be telling today. A very, very long time ago, the people of Israel were behaving very badly. They didn't do what our Father in heaven wanted them to do. This made God very upset with the Israelites, who didn't want him to rule over them. So what happened? God took the next step to teach them a lesson, like he taught Jonah from Jonah in the whale story, a lesson, and sent it to the Philistines to rule over them. God speaks. They did not want to follow the path I've shown them. So now they will see what happens when they disobey me. The Philistines were not very nice people. They tormented and tortured the Israelites. However, even though God was very angry with the Israelites, he also loved them. Since he couldn't see them being tortured like they were, he chose a couple who lived in Zorah to bear a son, and then sent this very strong Nazarite, one who would be dedicated to the Lord, to go and free the Israelites from the rule of the cruel Philistines. When God visited them and explained that this son would be born to them, they were overwhelmed with joy. "Thank you, O Lord," the father said, "for very much for listening to our prayers." An orange glow began to grow gently in the corner of the room. God replied, "Listen carefully, Manoah. The son I am giving you will be born, and be born very strong. You will need to follow caution and ensure that his hair is never, ever cut." I hope you're listening. As a young man, he will go and free the Israelites from the evil of the Philistines. As God had foretold, a son was surely born to Manoah and his wife. They named him Samson.
"Oh, Manoah, look at his beautiful blue eyes and how hard he grips my fingers. He's very strong. Look how fast his hair is growing. It looks like a mane of a lion."
Yes, dear. Yes, and as the Lord said, he is as strong as a lion. Years went by, and as soon as Samson reached manhood, he fell in love with a woman who was a Philistine. One day he returned home and told his parents all about the woman he had fallen in love with. No surprise, they were absolutely, both of them, very upset. "I can't believe what you're saying, Samson, about this woman. You know how the Philistines are, and still you want to marry this woman? What in the world is wrong with you?"
Just because she's a Philistine doesn't necessarily mean she has to be bad.
Samson became very convincing and somehow talked his parents into having no choice but to give in to his wishes. So they set out to make arrangements for this marriage, one that they didn't want to see happen. However, Samson's mother was sorrowful. She sat on the edge of her bed and put her hands together and spoke to the Lord.
Oh Lord, have mercy, please. We don't have any idea how to convince our son not to go and marry a Philistine woman.
Before the marriage happened, however, Samson realized that the woman he had fallen in love with had betrayed him. He became very upset and called off the wedding. Manoah talks to his wife. Dear, thank the Lord now. Our prayers have been answered. After several months, Samson went and visited the valley of Sorek. Under a large maple tree, he saw what he thought was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Her name was Delilah. Of course, it wasn't long. And again, Samson fed heads over heels in love.
Oh, Delilah, you have stolen my heart. Will you marry me?
A man from the village comes up to Delilah. We hear the mighty Samson has fallen in love with you, Delilah. Is that true?
Yes, that's very true.
Well, my dear, we want you to do something for us.
Tell me what it is that you wish for me to do. I will do my best to help.
Well, thank you. We wish to know what is the secret behind Samson's strength. One day, Delilah found her chance when Samson was whistling and seemed to be in an excellent mood.
Love, everyone appears to fear you, my dear. Tell me what's the secret behind your strength.
Why such an unusual question?
I just wish to know everything about the man I love. Is there anything wrong with that?
Of course not, my dear. If I were to be tied up tightly with fresh bowstrings that haven't dried, my strength would be gone and I would be like all men.
Oh, my love, that is very interesting. Come here, dear. Let me tie you up with fresh bowstrings and see for myself.
So she grabbed a handful of bowstrings and quickly tied up Samson's arms and wrist. Then she shouted loudly so that the Philistine men behind the trees hiding could hear her.
Samson, look! The Philistines are coming.
Samson turned and saw they were indeed coming his way. He stretched the bowstring, and they snapped as though they were made of brittle hay straw.
Samson, you lied to me. Obviously, you do not love me.
Delilah, please stop. Let me explain. I do love you, my dear.
Delilah continued to nag at Samson to tell her the secret to his extraordinary strength. Finally, Samson couldn't keep avoiding Delilah's seducing powers, asking how was he so strong. He finally gave in.
My strength comes from my hair, my love. My life is dedicated to God, and I have never cut my hair since the day I was born, Delilah. If my hair was cut off, all my strength would disappear.
Are you really telling me the truth, Samson?
Yes, Delilah, that is the truth.
Delilah sent a message to the Philistines, informing them that she finally learned of Samson's secret of his strength. During the night after they received Delilah's message, a Philistine man tiptoed into the room and gently cut off all of his hair. Once his hair was cut off again, Delilah shouted that the Philistines had come, and Samson had no strength to fight them. He was captured. The Philistines took Samson and threw him in a prison. Then the evil Philistines took him away and took out his eyes, gouging them to make matters even worse. Finally, an unknown man said, "We have been able to subdue our enemy. No one can defeat us now. Put Samson on the grinding wheel to mill the grain." After weeks of sitting in the corner of his dark and wet prison cell, Samson looks to the hard rock ceiling, and while shivering from the cold and damp conditions, he talks to God.
Oh God, the woman I loved and trusted let me down. I will take my revenge, God. Please help me.
While locked in prison, Samson's hair began to grow back, ever so slowly. His strength also started returning to his body. Thank goodness the Philistines were not aware of it. Then, it wasn't long, and Samson noticed his strength slowly returning, that the Philistines had a big festival and were offering a sacrifice to their god, God Dagon. And a Philistine man said, "Why don't we go and get Samson? Let's get him out of the prison, let's bring him up here, and he'll be great entertainment for all of us." And another man said, "Hey, what a great idea. We shall see how strong this man is now, my friend." The prison guards were instructed to bring Samson to the temple, where they were holding the great sacrificial feast. Instead, 2 soldiers escorted Samson from one of the prisons. One of the soldiers said, "Come on, Samson. Everyone at the feast is waiting for you to show them all your great strength." The strong Samson. As Samson was being led away from his cell to the festival, he stopped for a moment and whispered a prayer to God.
Oh God, please, just one more time is all I ask. Please give me my strength back. They have taken my sight and my strength away. I wish to pay them back for what they have done. Please, O Lord, help me.
The soldiers led Samson to the great temple where the festival was held. Once they arrived, one of the soldiers stayed to watch, and the other went to find out where the Philistines wanted him to be for his performance. Samson was standing between 2 enormous pillars of the great temple. Although Samson could not see, he heard a lot of noise and knew there were many people gathered in the temple. He reached his hands out. He groped around, and he could feel the 2 pillars on each side of him. Samson prayed,
Oh Lord, please help me. I again pray to you to give me the strength to avenge all the evil that these Philistines have done, and Lord, I wish to die along with them.
Samson shuffled around with his feet and positioned himself firmly between the pillars, spreading out both of his arms. He then used all of his strength and began pushing the great columns. Unfortunately, it seemed to happen almost immediately after a brief time of pushing, and the pillars of the great temple came crashing down, killing all the Philistines inside. Doing this in one giant push, Samson killed more Philistines than he had in his entire lifetime, and his prayer was answered as he also lost his life when the pillars and the temple crumbled down. When the news of losing his life and the destruction of the temple reached his family, his brothers and sisters rushed to the temple. One of the brothers said, "Let us take our brother's body and give him a decent burial which he most surely deserves." The family of Samson removed his body from the debris and took it back to Zorah. His body was buried just outside the town of Zorah in a cave where his father Manoah lay. We will now break down the story and what it means when we return from hearing a few words from my sponsor. So, don't go away. We'll be right back in 30 seconds. Have you heard about Anchor.fm by Spotify? It's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Yep, Anchor has the tools that will allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. And best of all, Anchor is totally free. Download the Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started. Well, we're back, and now with the rest of my story. Samson never married Delilah, but they do engage in a very intimate relationship. This, of course, later clouded Samson's judgment when Delilah tried to ensnare him and turn him over to the Philistines on many occasions. Samson had many run-ins with Israel's most notorious of enemies. They wanted him disgraced for all the trouble he's caused them. And when Delilah stepped onto the scene, they knew precisely how to do it. Not told in the story, but the Philistines bribed her with 1,100 shekels of silver to uncover the secret to Samson's strength. Obviously, that was an incentive to put a lot of money in her pocket. So, she threw love out the window. If they could eliminate Samson's strength, and they could overcome him and subjugate him to torture and the greatest of humiliation. I realize as you're out there listening to my podcast today, you just thought to yourself, that's great, but how much are 1,100 shekels of silver? Although the conversion rates are a bit tricky, we know they offered almost $100,000 in today's economy for her to find out what her lover's secret was. The scriptures aren't clear about Delilah's motivations. Possibly she never loved Samson in the very first place. But, on the other hand, maybe the Philistines used intimidation tactics. No matter what the case might be, she took them up on their offer and set out to find out about the source of Samson's strength. She tried on multiple occasions to finagle it out of him, but he tricked her, and on several occasions causing the Philistines, failing to apprehend him twice. Samson must have drawn the connection, he just must have, between Delilah trying to uncover the secret of his strength and that of the Philistines coming to attack him soon thereafter. Nevertheless, because Samson loved Delilah deeply, in a mental and sensual fashion, he proceeded to go along. Finally, he gave in and told her the secret to his strength, his long, flowing black hair. The truth was that Samson's strength didn't come from his hair. It came from God. And however, because he had given in to the temptress Delilah, God allowed him to lose all of his strength when Delilah cut Samson's hair in his sleep. As a result, the Philistines overtook him. They blinded him and turned him into an enslaved person. A tidbit of scripture history here is that it's amazing when you think about it. The most muscular man who ever lived in the history of the Bible and the wisest man who ever lived in the history of the Bible, King Solomon, who ever lived were both conquered by women. That should be a lesson to all men of all time. Solomon said this, and trust me, it's very confusing, and it's Solomon's words and not mine. He says, I find more bitter than loss of life the woman whose heart is snares and nets, and her hands as bands. Whoso pleases God shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be taken by her. Wow, right? Oh, don't be offended, all you women out there listening to my podcast. Remember that God chose Mary, who, by the way, is a woman, of course, as the vessel of honor to bring the Savior of all mankind into this world. Jesus is most precious. Clearly, tricking the love of your life into getting captured by his enemy would most definitely qualify as a relationship deal breaker, right? But we've more red flags that Samson should have caught on to way before they reached the Philistine capture phase. he was blinded earlier than mentioned in my podcast by her love. The scriptures don't say she's a Philistine, but she does come from a town just outside of Israel. Furthermore, her actions indicate that she doesn't follow God or his commands. She doesn't care. In later years, King Solomon fell into the same trap. He married wives and courtesans from foreign nations, and they too clouded his judgment. In the same way, Christians must exercise caution when dating or marrying those outside of the Christian faith. In 2 Corinthians 6:14, it reads, "Do not be yoked together with unbelievers, for what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness?" Let's not be naive. Samson and Delilah did have extramarital sex. Okay? There, I've said it. The Bible doesn't clarify if the two had plans to get together under the bonds of holy matrimony, but the two never married, and they likely didn't have plans to anytime soon. I'm sitting here now, and I'm speculating, but there's nothing that tells me everyone abstained from sex because it was 4,000 years ago, and things were all different. In Christian circles, this is definitely a most hot-button issue. I don't wish to discuss rights and wrongs here today. That's not the purpose of my story. After all, many Christians will engage in sex before marriage. That's a fact. You can't hide from it, even if it was with the intention of getting married eventually. Let me ask, why did Samson make a mistake here? Think about it. Sex physiologically connects us to another person. We draw a more profound connection with them than any other time with a relationship. And bonds are difficult to rip. Samson might have wanted to get away from Delilah. Maybe he saw the signals of her deception and simply wanted to get the heck out of Dodge. But because they forged a bond through sex, he must have found it much harder to break away from her. He must have imagined the kind of pain that he would cause both Delilah and himself. His pain exacerbates all the more when she betrays him, and he loses his strength, his sight, and his freedom. Yep, Samson did ignore all the red flags during his relationship with Delilah. He had to be incredibly naive not to draw any connections between the Philistine attacking him and Delilah's meddling into the secret of all his might and muscle. Although Samson didn't really top the list for the most wisest of judges, he had to have detected some massive red flags and correlations. But unfortunately, he chose to disregard them and trust in his own strength instead of that of the Lord to rescue him from his enemies. At the very end, his strength failed him. And because he didn't do something about those red flags, he wound up at the end of a very messy relationship. Today we can learn 3 clear things from Samson and Delilah's messy romantic love story. First, it's definitely not a Hallmark movie channel breakup and has a happy ending story. We all need to exercise caution in the world of dating and the world of marriage. Get to know the person you're with before you elect to spend the rest of your life with them. Delilah was undoubtedly beautiful and undoubtedly alluring, but because Samson didn't heed the red flags, he discovered she had a rather ugly side underneath. Sex can cause immense hurt when two people break the bond and go separate ways. We can only imagine the tremendous pain Samson felt when he finally discovered Delilah's betrayal of his love. It's essential to always have relationships of a non-sexual kind with anyone who's outside the church. After all, yeast doesn't do any good if it just hangs out with yeast all the time. This is actually a scripture from Matthew 13. But when it comes down to relationships that have the intention of marriage, we really need to make sure that our partners pursue a relationship with God wholeheartedly. Samson's love story doesn't top my list for most romantic or most swoon-worthy like seen in some of my romance novels. But like all breakups, we can learn a lot from this story. First, we learn the importance of finding a life partner who pursues Jesus wholeheartedly. We also learn that taking a relationship too far can hurt us in more ways than one, even if our partner doesn't betray us to the Philistines. The Bible says it was Delilah's beauty that enthralled Samson. Physical attributes, they're terrible factors to base a relationship on. In the beginning, a person's looks may draw your attraction, but their heart should be tested and weighed before committing long term. Samson had compromised his morals, and he compromised his principles, so there were no guardrails to protect the man's heart when Delilah walked into his life. Her gorgeous looks were enough to give her access to the deepest part of him. Sometimes what starts off as something beautiful turns into something hideous if we develop relationships that are only valuable on the surface. Well, I've talked enough today. As some call it, I hope you enjoyed my love story from the Bible. If a love story has ever had an unhappy ending, it was this one. The record of Delilah, the heartless wrecker of such a mighty man, is one of the most graphic ever told in the Bible. Yes, Delilah used all the parts God gave her to lure a man to his spiritual and physical destruction. The woman stands out as one of the lowest and meanest women in the Bible. You might call her the female Judas of the Old Testament. Well, with that said, my good friends, it's time to go. I want to thank you for listening to the podcast today. And before we call it a complete end, please find the follow tab up at the top and click it, and I'll let you know when the next episode comes out. Furthermore, I would love to hear what you think in a voicemail. It's easy. On the side of the podcast is a blue tab that says, Leave Voicemail. Oh, and yes, be sure to leave a review if you don't do any of the others. Next, I'll be talking about the story of the making of the Stormlord Trilogy series, a paranormal romance about one of the lead actors in the final novel, who's Archangel Michael. So come back, listen to the story of evil versus good, and Satan and Archangel Michael and all the forces from hell and all the forces from heaven, led by Archangel Gabriel blowing his horn. A big thank you also to my grandchildren, Alyssa and Dylan, and to our good friend and their good friend, Gabby, for their help in the making of this broadcast. Two of the best grandchildren, and let's not forget to thank Gabby, our BFF. So, until later, see you later, alligator.
Well, that does it for me for another great episode from Sidney St. James. Be sure to click on the tab above that says send a voice message, and I will get it from you, and I'll probably play it back on one of my future podcasts. Also, don't forget to click the button follow. I'd love for you to follow my podcast. But it's been fun. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And until next time, here I am, Sidney St. James. Happy listening.